Hello, hello, everybody, and welcome to another fantastic episode of Truth Wanted. I'm your host, Objectively Dan, and this is the live call-in show where we talk to people about what they believe and why. Live Fridays at 7 p.m. Central every single week, and every single week I have a very special guest with me. This week is no different. It is Dr. Josh of Digital Hamaruby. Dr. Josh, what's going on?
Not too much. Thanks for having me on.
Yes. So if you're not familiar with Dr. Josh, he is a cool guy. He has a PhD in Assyriology and is one of two members of the Digital Hamaruby channel, where you talk about the Bible, ancient history, Syrian languages, and that related stuff that they pay you the big bucks for, not me. So I'm excited to hear you talk about that tonight. Thanks for being on.
Yeah. I appreciate that. Yeah, it should be a good time. We have a lot of fun with it. So
for sure. So I wanted to start off this conversation in particular, talking about the good book, Dr. Josh. I think you've heard of it. I think you've read it once or
couple
twice.
times.
Couple times. Yeah. The Bible, right? The Bible. It's a big book, but it's a book that you have spent part of your scholarship and your academic career kind of looking at very seriously. And I think a lot of people are surprised. I know we were talking about this before the show. When I was a kid, I had no idea that even the concept of like biblical studies as like an academic discipline was a thing. And not only is it a thing, but they have a lot to say about the Bible and its claims. And that's something that you talk about a bit on your channel as well. So I wanted you to maybe talk about like, what's your relationship been like with the Bible, as someone who grew up in the church and then also kind of now looks at it in an academic fashion.
Yeah. So I guess we can go as deep with that as you'd like. I mean, I grew up as a fundamentalist evangelical Christian. We went to a Baptist church as far back as I can remember. I was saved when I was 5 or 6 years old. And, I wanted to be a missionary when I was, when I was that age, and probably up until I was about 10 or 12. But then I kind of grew up and wanted to become a pastor, like what you're supposed to do. So,
Right. Sure.
But yeah, we were, in church 3 times a week plus. And when I graduated high school, I joined the Air Force and immediately, started diving into my bachelor's degree from Liberty University, which, people know what Liberty University is. That tells you something about my background. So that's where I got my bachelor's degree in religion. And then I got commissioned as a second lieutenant to become a chaplain in the Air Force. And I started going to seminary. And I went to a very evangelical school, conservative evangelical school called Capital Bible Seminary in just outside of DC. And I got my master's of theology there. And so, up to that point, I was obviously, I pastored a church for 7 years out in Virginia. And, so Christianity, fundamentalist evangelical Christianity was who I was to my core.
Right.
And I got into Johns Hopkins University to become an Assyriologist, which is essentially just, for somebody that specialized in the Old Testament, it was my way of getting an even broader look at the wider ancient Near East. So, you learn languages like Akkadian, Sumerian, Aramaic, and the cultures of ancient Iraq, which, always, came into contact with in a variety of ways with the Southern Levant, with Palestine. And my first year there, I became an atheist.
Wow, that's all it took. 1 year,
yeah.
huh?
And it was probably about halfway through my first year. And it was just, having to read the ancient literature and not, this was the big problem for me anyway, because I have friends that are evangelicals that went through Hopkins with me. One of my best friends is, fills that fits that category. And the thing is, when he was challenged with sort of these academic problems, these historical, archaeological, literary problems with the Hebrew Bible, with the Bible in general. He was in a setting where it was controlled. I would say it was safe, because he was also in an evangelical school, but it was a very academically minded one.
Sure.
And so, it was, this sounds bad, but here's how it makes sense. Whereas with me, it was just, well, here's the data. I mean, it wasn't even about the Bible. It was just, look, here's history of the ancient Near East. Here's history of Palestine. Here's the literary text that, it was like, wait a minute, this is all incredibly problematic. So, I after about a year and a half, maybe, of being a kind of a hard atheist, I kind of slipped back in, probably for no other reason than it was easier for me to, like, a soft agnosticism. But, more recently, maybe the past couple of years, somebody said, Josh, talking to you, I think you're an atheist. I think it's probably better to call you an atheist than an
comes
agnostic.
out a little bit. Yeah.
So,
I mean, like, when you know what you know, I imagine that's pretty difficult, because I kind of came to a similar thing with my own kind of deconstruction, where it was like, oh, I'm reading all this apologetic stuff, I'm reading what critics have to say, and it got to a point where it's like, suddenly my relationship with Christianity I couldn't relate it to the Christians around me anymore, because they believe in something totally different than what I did. Even as when I was going through this kind of progressive Christian stage in my Christianity, it was like, even this is like, it's too much. And it's like, it doesn't fit in with the people around me. And even the other people that I agree with, like, I still disagree with them on other stuff. Like, it didn't even make sense. So I can imagine, as someone in your field who, grew up evangelical, who did all the right things that you're supposed to do, and then having it not match up, I can imagine that's probably pretty difficult.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing that I see, particularly here online, that I can that resonates with me is, if you start off with your conclusion, right? You've had this personal experience with Jesus Christ, and deep down the Bible is the Word of God, and therefore it's inerrant and inspired.
Yeah.
Any problems that you face with that, it's very difficult to overcome that core belief, right? And so, you can say to somebody, hey, look, there are conflicting accounts here in the Joseph story of Genesis 37, or hey, this, look at there seem to be two different flood stories in Genesis 6 through 9, or how do you, look, there are problems with the creation story that's in Genesis 1 and the other one that's in Genesis 2.
Yeah.
But if you're talking to somebody that has this core belief that the Bible is inspired, I liken it to the show Monk. If you've ever seen that television show Monk, about the brilliant detective, every episode starts off with this impossible murder that took place, and that person did it, but there's no way that he could have done it. But you trust Monk, right? From watching the show that he's right, and at the end of the show he's going to be right, and so you go with it, and whatever possible scenario, contrived thing that comes out, he jumped out of an airplane and parachuted down, and then was able to tunnel underground back into his jail cell just in time for the people to see him. Like, that all, it's possible. And so that must be what it was.
Right.
And that's how it is. For me at Hopkins, it took so much before it was like, God, is this really the inspired text? Because for goodness sake, like, it's just one wave after another of problems. And once that happened, it just allowed for what makes more sense here.
Right. When you realize that the text is just written by a bunch of humans, just like you and me, and there doesn't seem to be, in my opinion, any evidence of divine inspiration, then suddenly the book's, it's not as powerful as it was. I mean, like, why revolve your life around this thing if it's just as good as anybody else's take on the world? And in fact, it's not as good as everybody else's take on the world, because, and you know this for a fact, that there are claims made in that book that don't match up with what we observe in reality, at least in terms of archaeology, but also in terms of life, and in terms of just, other kinds of stuff too. So Yeah, that's really interesting. And you brought up some interesting points too, where it's like I didn't even realize there were like two different flood accounts in the Bible until I was like really doing deep dives and doing my deconstruction. I didn't realize there were like two separate, really Genesis stories. But like, I guess you kind of, I'm used to like Sunday school accounts of what you see in the text. You read a little bit of the passage. Maybe you're on a youth retreat and you just read a little bit, and that's it. That's your daily dose of the Bible. Or maybe you have some sort of daily verse calendar thing that you go through. I had one or two of those. But when you read it, when you decide to sit down and just look through it, and then you look up like the academic commentary, you just get a very, very, very different picture than what you're usually taught at church. And there's a lot of questions that come up that don't always have satisfying answers, at least in my experience. So
and there's it's a little sad to me, actually. I put a chapter in this new book that's coming out about the contradictions in the Pentateuch, because it's the chapter is called "Did Moses Write the Pentateuch?" And I look at the first two chapters of Genesis, and there's significant problems, right? Very significant problems. And one of them that comes up is, for example, outside of things like, was man created at the end of creation, or was he created at the beginning of creation? Were man and woman created at the same time, or were they created at two separate times? But one of the things that was is really difficult in that comparison is looking at the creation of the animals, because clearly in Genesis 1, animals are created and then mankind is created last. But in Genesis 2, man is created and then he's placed in the garden, and then the animals are created and brought before him, and they're brought before him for a purpose. They're for him to find this like helper. Right, this helper that's sort of suited to him, and of course, when they don't suit him, then God creates woman.
Right.
But it's interesting to read through some of the commentaries on Genesis and how they try to wrestle with this. And ideas like Victor Hamilton in his Genesis commentary has a comment, and I'll paraphrase it, but it's something like, "Well, this isn't, it's not really a problem because God created all the animals in Genesis 1, but then he created new animals for the garden." And it's like, okay, I mean, is that possible? I mean, I don't think so, because it says things in the Hebrew. It's like, and he created all the animals and all the birds of the sky. And it's like, that's language of initial creation. But I mean, okay, maybe you mean all the birds of the sky for the garden. But I mean, if you have to go there, it's sort of, it's problematic.
And suddenly it doesn't become as accessible. And isn't the whole point of this book is that it's supposed to be the guideline to life and everything, right? What's the point if you have to look up certain translations and certain other things in order to get the truth of the message? And I understand that's not how the Hebrew people necessarily understood at least their books, right? But that's the Christian idea, right? That's the idea of at least a popular evangelical idea, that this is a book, this is your guide to life, and it's going to tell you all the answers, but you have to get the right interpretation with the right translations and the right commentaries. Otherwise, you're going to be completely lost. And like even now, so I have like a copy of the Skeptic's annotated Bible here, right? It's fun. I recommend people get one just to look at it if you're not even interested in reading the Bible. That's a fun way to look through it. But even then, I'm like, I'm not even sure if some of these things because what it does is it points out some of the like kind of ridiculous stuff in the Bible, but it also talks about like some contradictions and stuff. I'm not fully convinced that at least a quarter of those, if not half, are probably not even actually contradictions. I think it's probably just a misunderstanding of the original text and stuff of these languages. And I see that as a problem in the atheist community. I think sometimes we kind of pull contradictions out there. But even then, it's like, well, we can't even be sure because we don't know, because we don't even have a lot of the original text for this stuff. And these are copies on copies on copies. I mean, there's just so many problems when you look at treating this book as the be all end all,
Yeah. I mean, I think, Joel Baden is a biblical scholar out at Yale, brilliant guy, and he wrote a book, 2012 publication called The Composition of the Pentateuch. And I recommend everybody get it. It's he's just a great guy and a
Mm.
brilliant scholar. But he opens up his book with an analysis of Genesis 37 and the Joseph story that everybody's familiar with. And the question that he asks is, how did Joseph get to Egypt? If you remember the story, Joseph has this dream and he tells it to his brothers and to his father and mother, and they're all supposed to worship him in this dream, and they all get really pissed at him. And he goes out to visit his brothers out, tending the sheep, and the brothers plot to kill him, but then they end up throwing him in a pit. And then ultimately he gets sold to this, these traveling merchants, and they take him down to Egypt and sell him into slavery to Potiphar. Well, the problem is if you read the text closely, and he has a brilliant analysis of this, and you ask yourself, how did he get there? It's really hard to answer, because the text lays out that they plot to kill him, but then they see that this Ishmaelite caravan coming by, and they decide, let's not do that. Let's sell him to the Ishmaelites.
Oh, looks like we're having some technical difficulties here. I'm assuming all of you guys can still hear me. But Dr. Josh is frozen, so it's just going to be me talking for a bit. What's up, everybody? Hi, Objectively Dan. How's your week been? Mine's been pretty good. Yeah, the Bible is a crazy, crazy book. When I think about my own relationship with it, I think about kind of like what I was talking about earlier, right? Like I'm used to being spoon-fed these kind of Sunday school answers and Sunday school versions of what it actually says in the text. As I got older, as I started to do more of that kind of youth retreat work, when I was actually like a leader at some of these things, I started to really get into it. I started to get more books about the Bible, and I got a greater context of it, but I was still a Christian at this point. I was still trying to figure out why these problems were there. And I think every Christian, if they're honest, will admit that, yeah, there's like, you can have struggles with this, there can be doubts of this stuff, but kind of like what Dr. Josh was saying, like at the end of the day, you're supposed to know that this is the truth and that you can put all of your faith into this and basically swear your allegiance to something that you don't even fully understand, which I think is incredible. I think it's incredible that I was convinced to do that from like a very, very young age. And in my opinion, that's fucked up. I think it's fucked up to make people say, yeah, you should put all of your trust and all of your belief into this grand plan thing that you will never fully understand for the rest of your life, that you won't know until you get to heaven, but is true. That doesn't make sense to me. And we wouldn't ask that kind of level of agreement or authority over your life for anything else, but for some reason we do that with Christianity. So I don't know why that is. I don't know what the best solution is, but I encourage people to talk to people about this and really question, why do you put so much trust into this Bible thing? Like, how much do you really know about it? Because the more I learn about the Bible, the more I am glad I don't believe in it anymore. I guess I'm glad that I kind of, distance myself with that relationship to it, because man, it doesn't get any better. I've yet to find strong, compelling reasons to believe that I should trust this book in its whole again. And which even now I would say, yeah, it wasn't even meant to be as a whole. It's definitely, if you look at each book of the Bible, I think each author had their own kind of interpretation of what God was and what these stories were supposed to mean, that didn't all the time agree with each other. And even sometimes the same author of different books probably kind of contradict a little bit in their theology and understanding of things. But anyway, I think we have Dr. Josh back on with us, and we're getting the scene set for that. Of course, this is what happens sometimes, folks. It's a live show. It is what it is. Thankfully, we have a couple callers in on the line. So if you guys want to call, remember, this is a live show. We're going to get to callers in just a little bit here. As soon as Dr. Josh is back on the screen, I think we're going to take some calls, and then we're also going to talk about our patron of the week. But folks, I need to tell you guys something. We've gone through all of our list of people who were patrons so far. We don't have, except for tonight, we have one new patron, but for everybody else, we need some more patrons so we can do new patrons of the week, because I don't want to shout out the same names as before. I don't want to do double duty. I want more people to come donate to the show. So please consider donating on patreon.com/truthwanted. Along with getting a shout out on the show, you will also get your name in the credits. So that's pretty fun. And let's do the patron of the week this week. Well, we got the graphic here on screen. The patron of the week is Colson. Thank you, Colson. Colson is a member of the crew who decided to donate because he wanted more people to donate to the show. So if you guys haven't already, please consider donating to patreon.com/truthwanted. It helps out with everything we do. I made no personal profit from this show. This show is almost entirely run by volunteers who believe in this project and making it a success. Dr. Josh, are you back with us now? Okay, well, we can still hear you. So, and I think if I can hear you, that means everybody else can hear you, unless I'm told otherwise. So until that gets fixed, I think I'm going to go ahead and get to the calls, unless the crew tells me otherwise. So I'm going to try to get to our first caller of the night. Are you ready, Josh? All right, cool. Let's talk to Allie, who has been waiting on the line for some time now. Allie, you are live on Truth Wanted. What's going on?
Hi. Oh my God, this is so weird. I'm so excited. Hi, how you doing?
I'm doing great. You sound really excited.
I am. I've been wanting to call and talk about this kind of thing for a while. I'm just really excited to finally be doing that.
All right, cool. Well, yeah, let's have it. What's going on?
Okay, so my situation, I grew up as a Christian, and then as I was in college, I left that and kind of became a very new agey type of person. And I was very vocal about all I was gaining from, tarot reading and crystal healing. And I was known in my little like artsy community as like that girl. If you want to know about tarot, go ask her. However, over the last year and a half, I've, gotten way more into the philosophical side of, is it actually true? And
sure.
I've come to the conclusion that it's not. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. That's quite an identity shift then.
Yeah. So the situation I'm in right now is that here's the other thing, is that I'm really into street epistemology, and yesterday I went out for the first time to like do it myself, and I want to go do that more. And I realize I'm going to kind of have to perhaps talk to my spiritual friends and let them know, hey, I don't actually think that rock is healing you. And I don't know how to approach that with them. And it's harder than any of my like Christian community.
Yeah.
Because you see the issue there?
Yeah, I see the issue there. And like, you're definitely not alone. Like these topics are really awkward to talk about for multiple reasons. One of them being like, these are people's identities that you are messing with. Like you said, I mean, like you said, you were that girl. You weren't talking like, when I talk about me being an atheist, I'm not necessarily saying anything about my personality, but like when I talked about how I was as a Christian, like that actively described like some of my behaviors. Like I've had people, I don't know if you've had this experience, Allie, but I've had people tell me before, oh, Dan, you're just so nice. I thought you were a Christian, right? Because like there's like an identity thing going on there. And when you mess with that a little bit, that becomes a bit harder to deconstruct. And the healing stuff, the new age stuff, I mean, that could be a part of that too, if it's a really integral belief system, right? So like, yeah, what's the best way to talk about it? I'll tell you this, Allie, there is no best way to talk about it. There is no best way to talk about it. The best way to talk about it, I mean, well, the best way you can start to talk about it is to just bring it up. Say that you're interested. Say that like, hey, like this is something I've been thinking about and I wanted to talk about this with you because you're a friend of mine. And I know that this is something that you're really into, you really believe. And like, I just wanted to see if these questions made sense to you or what you would say about it. Because ultimately that's what I try to do when I talk to people. I'm genuinely interested in what people have to say most of the time. Right. Like I want to know how people come to the beliefs that they do. I want to know those reasons because I want to know if they are good reasons. And if they are good reasons, I'd like to adopt those beliefs for myself. And so I think there's an attitude that you can take towards this that's not hostile. That's not like, I'm here to come tear down everything you believe. It's, look, you have this interesting belief. I have a lot of questions about this belief. Would you mind if we had a conversation about it? And I think that's the best strategy you can take. But I don't know. What do you think?
I try to have that in most situations, and that makes a lot of sense. I think the biggest hurdle to this is the fact that they still assume that I agree with them in all these beliefs, and I don't know how to kind of come out of the closet in that sense.
So here,
a lot of them, they just
Let me ask you this. Do you think having this conversation with them, do you think that's going to reveal that you're a bit more skeptical of your position? Is that a worry of yours?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, no, it's not. It's honestly just because if I was having this conversation, if I was having this conversation with a stranger, it would be much more easy to just be, curious, asking the questions. But from a friend, I worry that they might feel betrayed, or they might not know. They might think of me different.
Yeah.
Especially with the pandemic, I have my one little pod that I see, and them specifically,
I totally know what you mean, Allie. I totally know what you mean, because I am there are still people that from my personal life who find out that I do this show, and that's a surprise to them because they knew this other Dan, this Christian Dan that did these Bible studies and was hanging out of the church all the time and doing all that kind of stuff. So I totally understand wanting to avoid that shock, right? I've had better times coming out about it, and I've had really bad times coming out about it. But at the end of the day, Allie, what I've realized is I am happiest now than I've ever been, because I am the most honest with myself than I've ever been. Because there's a lot of people in my life that I had to continue, and there's still people in my life that fully don't know, but for the longest time I had to pretend like I was somebody that I wasn't. And that's a stressful place to be in, to keep up those appearances and stuff. And, this kind of coming out of the closet experience is unfortunately a necessary thing, I think, because you will never have a true level of friendship with the person that you want to have that friendship with unless they really know who you are. And if they love you for who you are and they genuinely like you for you, then they should be able to overcome that and get through that with you. I have friends that I was friends with when I was Christian who are still friends with me, and I have people who aren't friends with me anymore. And I learned who my real friends were. And I know now with the pandemic and stuff, it's especially harder to do. But I promise you, Allie, it's in the long run, it's so much worth it. I wish I could have came out sooner, honestly. I think doing this show and doing other stuff made it more complicated for me personally. But you don't have your face plastered over the internet where people can Google you and stuff, right? You're just a person who has questions, who has doubts about things, and you know what? That's okay, and you should feel okay for asking questions. So anyway, that's my take on it.
And I think you're right. Yeah, and I am really passionate about getting people to think more, and I really want to be kind of a voice of the secular community in where I live, because there's no secular understanding where I live. It's so religious, and so I feel as soon as I can get out there and speak for us, because nobody else is right now. There's just a hurdle to that. So I appreciate the insight.
Yeah, Dr. Josh, do you have any insight on this as well?
I mean, I think you've said it well. I think that people want to be heard. People want to be loved, and you sound like the type of personality that really cares about the people that you're going to engage with, and I think that comes through when you talk to them. So one thing that nobody wants to hear, obviously, is somebody talking down to them, and so I think that being able to come out honestly and to say, if somebody does give you pushback, about, I can't believe you've betrayed us. I mean, I probably came out as at least as an atheist, as an agnostic, I guess it's 11 years now. And, I had a conversation with my mother quite recently, who is still a fundamentalist evangelical Christian. And she's, still praying for me and wants to know why I've done this. But so I don't know that stuff ever goes away. But I just think that being a genuine person that cares about the people that you're engaging with, and talking to really is in my experience, for what that's worth, is really the key, letting people know that you love and care about them.
Yeah. I've talked to people too, where the last people I ever thought would ever be an atheist became an atheist years later that I hadn't kept up with them. One of the callers on the show, Emily, was one of those people. That was a couple episodes back where they called in. Somebody that I knew back when we were both teenagers. It was just like, wow, I didn't think we would be where we are, but people can surprise you. So I wouldn't be surprised either if maybe your friends also have doubts, but they're afraid to talk about it. And they don't have anybody to talk to because they're afraid of the same social pressure. I mean, you can change a lot just in your own community. So that's something to think about too.
That's so true. That reminds me, my sister and I both became atheists on our own after we left the house.
So there you go.
And moved away. And when we both realized it was a revelation. So I feel a whole lot better. Oh,
good. Yeah. I'm totally encouraging the street epistemology thing. Go for it. If you want to have those conversations, I agree with you. Having conversations with strangers is way easier than having it with friends and family. And I know that from doing this every week, but I promise you, once you get over that hurdle and once you're able to talk to people about it, by the way, you should join the Atheist Community of Austin Discord and share your experiences as well. If you don't have a community. Yeah. Well, just find a community that you can debrief this too, because that was super helpful for me. I know, being able to talk about it with people I could trust. And, I recommend that to you as well.
I'm going to get on that. I'm so bad at social media and all that. I'm like a grandpa, but I'm going to do that right after I get off this call.
Cool.
Awesome. To have these ideas. Oh, and after I get off this call as well, I think I'll go be a patron on the Patreon if you need a new patron. So you can give me a shout out.
That's what's up. Yeah, we'll give you a shout out, Allie, for sure. Thank you. Thank you for doing that. And I hope we were helpful here. I know it's super hard. And there's still, like I said, there's still people that I haven't talked to about this because they're not people I talk to every day. They don't necessarily need to know. But if these are your friends, it's going to happen eventually. I say rip that Band-Aid off as soon as you can, as long as you are in a safe place to do it. I want to advise that if you're not financially dependent on these people, and if you're not afraid of physical harm, and it's just a social awkwardness, I say, look, that's it. You got to do it. But anyway, Ali, thanks so much for calling in. Appreciate your call. I hope things go well for you. Absolutely. Have a good one.
Have a good night.
That was nice. I hope Allie's conversations with her friends go well, but I stand by the fact that I'm in a much better place now that I'm honest with myself with who I am, especially now that I'm older. I think part of it too was the awkwardness of being in college and still trying to figure out the whole who am I kind of thing, and wanting to have stable relationships with people. And when you have an identity shift that grand, that affects that stability as well. So there's a lot of factors that go into this, but I still stand by the fact that you should do it. You should totally do it. Because man, it's so worth it, at least for me right now. So I don't know. Any other thoughts on that, Dr. Josh? Or?
No, I feel like you said it real well.
All right. Well, Allie, definitely reach out as well. Email the show. It's truth@atheist-community.org. I would love to hear a follow-up on that if you don't call in to the show again, which would be welcome as well. But let's go ahead and go to our next caller here. I want to talk to, let's go to Jay calling in from Missouri. Jay, what's going on?
Oh, not much, guys. How you guys doing? Dan and Dr. Josh, nice to speak with you.
Yes, we're doing all right. I'm in a good mood. So what's going on, Jay?
Well, I actually just discovered your channel, and I really appreciate it. I love the conversational tone to everything. I think it's very healthy. It's very productive. So I did want to say that initially, but
thank you. Appreciate that.
Discovered you a couple weeks ago, and I tried to call in last week and wasn't able to get on in time, but I'm glad I was able to get on today. Wanted to call. I thought it might be interesting and kind of a cool exercise just to share personal experience that I had with God, to see what your guys' thoughts on it are. And you guys can pick it apart all you want and so forth.
Sure. Go for it.
So I love what you guys were saying earlier. I do think, as far as for me, experience is definitely what my faith is rooted in, personal experience with God. I do believe the word is God's word, but I tend to, as I grew more mature in my faith, I tend to not make it as black and white as I think most Christians do. I feel like God's just kind of trying to communicate general themes and principles to his followers. And so when it comes to me, it's all about the experience for the most part. So that being said, I probably had 4 or 5 major experiences throughout my life. And the one that I wanted to share with you was a dream that I had about 17 years ago. It's a short dream. I'll just go ahead and share it. It was extremely intense dream that I had just before I woke up on a Sunday morning, to the point where I shared the dream to my wife immediately after I woke up, which is not something that I do very often. It was also a dream about my sister, which I thought was really odd because I never have dreams about my sister. I know it's kind of odd. I probably can count on one hand the number of times I've had a dream about my sister in my life for whatever reason. But anyway, so the dream went like this. I saw my sister. She was frantic and crying and, scurrying around her house looking for something. And she was distraught and wasn't able to find it no matter where she went. She was pulling the couch cushions up and just ransacking her whole house looking for this thing. And then basically I looked over, and the next thing I saw was like a chest of drawers with this gigantic diamond ring on it. I'm talking abnormally large diamond, probably 10 times larger than a normal diamond, sitting on top of the chest of drawers, and it was covered with a very thick layer of dust.
All right.
And I brought it to her attention, and she saw the ring, and her distraught feelings, her tears immediately went away. She, was rejoicing and going crazy, finding it, and that was basically the dream. It was a very quick dream, but very intense. So I was startled by it because of how it just hit me a certain way, that it just felt so intense that I shared it with my wife. I told her the dream, and I was like, I don't know what this is about. It makes no sense to me. Mm-hmm. So we went to church that day. I get home about a half hour after we get back from church. I get a phone call from one of my best friends, and he shares with me some terrible news. And the news is that my nephew, my sister's oldest son, was just killed in a car accident.
Oh no!
And it was a terrible day, obviously. Mm-hmm. And so, but immediately when I heard what happened, I immediately knew what the dream meant.
And what was that?
I'm just curious. Well, I'm going to ask you, knowing that I'm a Christian, I think this might be a fun little experiment. What do you think the dream might have meant?
Well, I would just start off by saying I don't really think dreams mean anything in general. I do think that dreams are kind of just a byproduct of our sleep that we definitely don't fully understand, but I definitely don't put any divine attributions to them in general. So when I give an interpretation, I just want to be forefront and say I don't actually think it means anything.
Right.
But if I were to guess, to be honest, I have no idea. I have no idea how you would pull those two together. Dr. Josh, do you have any guesses?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the thing that comes to mind is the parable about the pearl of great price, or the woman searching the house looking for the coin.
Yeah.
Although I mean, I feel like that's me reaching. I mean, just from what you've said, I would expect that the son, your nephew, would have been the ring. But by the way, I'm really sorry. I should have started off with that. That's really awful.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's what I would say. But I think I don't know any more. I wouldn't have any more specific guess than that.
Yeah, I just wanted to hear what you guys thought about it. I'm not expecting you guys to do a full exegesis on it or anything.
Sure.
But I just thought it might be fun for you to hear your perspective on it. So, because obviously I have my thoughts on it, and of course I also attributed the diamond ring to being her son, and that there was basically a period of time where she was separated from her son. And that's what the layer of dust over the ring represented, that there was a period of time that passed where she did not know where the ring was, didn't have the connection with the ring. And so I felt, and it was an extremely encouraging dream for my sister, because basically the message behind it from where I come from is that she will be reunited with her son, basically. And I feel like it's been something that she's held on to for the last 17 years, and she'll hold on to it for the rest of her life. And so I had no idea what it meant when I had the dream. It happened the morning, 4 or 5 hours before the accident happened. And immediately when it happened, I felt like everything just made sense. So to me, that was very powerful.
Yeah, I could see how that would be really powerful from your perspective of, because I think when I was a Christian, I definitely heard, I don't think I ever had a story where I had a dream and then something happened. Well, that's not true, actually. I remember that I had a dream about a grandmother that I met when I was like a baby, basically, that I had like a conversation with when I was older. And that was an interesting dream. And it was like, the setting was like, it was like in heaven, and I was talking to this woman who I'd never really talked to before. And I interpreted it as this grandmother that I never met, really. So, like, I guess that's one instance. And I'm sure if I asked Dr. Josh or some other people who are former believers, we probably have some stories. I think it's interesting that, a lot of people, it seems to be universal in these kinds of experiences. If you look at, other religious traditions, a lot of them do have these kinds of dream interpretations to attribute some sort of divine meaning to them. And from my perspective, that seems to be evidence to indicate that this is just a human phenomenon that happens sometimes, where we kind of attribute meaning to things that we otherwise wouldn't attribute meaning to, because of these coincidences or these strong feelings that we get from these dreams. And that's not to take anything away from you or your wife or your family. But I can see how it would make sense from my perspective as to why that would happen from a naturalistic standpoint, where I don't have to have a God explanation necessarily to explain why that would happen. And of course,
absolutely. You definitely don't need to, for sure.
Yeah, it's a tough thing to say, because obviously that experience is memorable enough for you to, interpret it the way you do, but also share that with me on this call-in show. And I appreciate you sharing that with me. But at the end of the day, that has to be my takeaway. Yeah. Go ahead.
One more detail I forgot. I can't believe I left the detail out. But the road that the accident occurred on was actually called Rings Road.
Oh, I see. I see.
Was also...
Yeah. Like this is the kind of the hard part of being an atheist sometimes, is when we talk about death and when we talk about the afterlife and when we talk about these awful tragedies that just happen because we're human beings living in this world, is that we don't have great divine explanations for a lot of just why things happen the way that they do. Sometimes things just happen. And as terrible as it is, it can sometimes be beautiful, but it's a lot of terrible. It's a lot of terrible. And I'm really sorry for that loss. And again, I'm grateful that you shared that with us. But I don't know. I don't know if that experience, I was a Christian that also heavily relied on personal experience towards the end of my Christianity. I think that's what made more sense to me, because I, like you, is probably really doubtful of what you called the Word of God, which I wouldn't even call the Word of God anymore. I know Dr. Josh wouldn't call it the Word of God. I was wondering if you didn't have these personal experiences, you mentioned you had a couple, but let's say none of these personal experiences would happen to you. Would you still be a Christian? And if so, why?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
That's a tough one to answer. I would not be surprised if I was not one, however, because I do think the personal experience part of the equation is vital to somebody having a lifelong faith. I think I believe, and I don't know if you guys would agree. I mean, obviously you don't believe in a God. But my belief about God is that he purposely has created life and wrote his word in a way that, you can kind of take things one way or another. You can either accept the questionable things like you guys were talking about earlier, the contradictions. You can kind of just be okay with that and be accepting of waiting to get an answer in the afterlife, or you can allow those things to start to mount up and pull you in the other direction. And I think that was done purposely, because I don't think God wanted to make it just completely easy and obvious, because then there's no pursuit. There's no development of the relationship. I mean, how much fun is it to date a girl that you don't have to try to chase a little bit, And I think it's kind of the same thing with God. He wanted there to be that process.
I would say, and Dr. Josh, I wanted you to comment on this as well. But here's what I would say to this, Jay. I'd say that this was a perspective I had when I was a Christian, and I realize now that's a very, very privileged perspective. And what I mean by that is, for us, if we were to call ourselves Christians, where we were, and I'm using my past Christian self here, right? This relationship with God is kind of a fun game, something we get to figure out and we don't know all the answers to. But for other people, this is a terrible, terrible tragedy. This is something that not having these answers has cost human lives. We're not talking about the difference between knowing what we're going to eat in heaven or not. We're talking about whether or not people's souls are saved, and also like whether or not you belong to the right ideology. Because if you don't belong to the right ideology, there's violence that comes from that, and there's been a long, long history of that. So I think this like conception of, wow, like this is, we get to have this fun relationship with God where we're kind of getting to know him more. I sympathize with that, but at the same time, I look at that with almost a grave horror, because yes, I get to sit here in the United States and talk to other, white Christian Anglo-Saxon Protestants about our fun experience, while people all around the world are dying of diseases that we have cures for. And that doesn't sound like the work of a loving God to me. That sounds like we're just people on a planet and we're doing our best. So that's my response to that. Dr. Josh, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, so I think my relationship with my wife right now is not one, and it never was one, of chase. But both of us were very open with one another. And I mean, I can very easily say that the relationship that I have with Megan is the strongest and most fruitful relationship that I've ever had, probably with another human. And when I compare this, see, because Jay, I thought exactly the same way, and it would have been for, I guess 26 years, 25 years. I was a Christian, and this is, in my opinion, for me anyway, it was a rationalization. It was a rationalization to say, well, there's a reason that we have to have faith, right? And faith is required. And we trust in what we've seen. And I would always go to, Hebrews 11 and point out all the great heroes of the faith. But the reality here is, I think that's if you step back from it, when I stepped back from it, it's a very manipulative. That's how it came across to me, as incredibly manipulative type of relationship that God was having with me, if in fact that was true. Because I can tell you, and to anybody listening that knows anything about me, I very much wanted my faith to be real, probably more after I became an atheist than when I was a Christian. Because what we're talking about here, the death of a loved one. Megan and I lost our son last year. And I mean, if there's one thing that I miss about being a Christian, is knowing that I'm going to see him again. And it's horrible. But that type of rationalization to say that there's a reason that God doesn't make it overtly clear, and that God doesn't part the skies and reveal to us, because we need to have faith, because we need to trust him. It would be one thing if it were in order to have the most full relationship, let's say, if we were to go back to, what Jesus said to Thomas, right? You've seen, and that's why you believe, but blessed are those that believe and have not seen. If there was always going to be this relationship, we were all going to get to go to heaven, it was going to be great. But there were certain people that if they just had this level of faith, that it would be an even better relationship. There were things that would be in this world even more full. I'd be a little better with that. The problem is, it was trust that you need to be saved without seeing evidence of this. In fact, evidence to the contrary, quite strong evidence at times. But you must have faith, otherwise eternal separation in hell.
Yeah.
And that's problematic for me. And as much as I want Christianity, the faith of my past to be true, I can't get there. I just can't get there.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So there you go, Jay. I think that's our responses to your perspective. We do have some other callers that we got to get to. I didn't expect for this call to go the way that it has, but in a way, I'm glad that we did, because this is a thing we have to talk about sometimes.
Yeah.
So, I just want to give you a chance to give any final remarks before we let you go, Jay.
Hey, first I just want to say I'm sorry to hear about your son, Dr. Josh. Really sorry to hear about that. But yeah, I appreciate all of your perspective, guys, and I'll let you get on to the next caller. Appreciate the talk. Maybe I'll call again later.
All right,
Thank
Jay,
you,
sounds good. Thanks for calling in. And again, very sorry to the both of you. Sometimes there's just aren't good words to say about things like this from our perspective, and I miss that too. I miss that I could give an explanation for why people go out the way that they do, why some people are in our lives for a while and why they're not, that it's all part of the grand plan, that there's just something going to the end of it. And now I have a perspective of, I'm just lucky to be where I'm at, the fact that there isn't a plan almost makes it even seem crazier, there's joys that come from that, but it's tough. It's a tough thing to grapple with, in terms of deconstructing. But we got some other callers that want to talk to us, Josh, specifically one that wants to talk to you. This is Ed calling in from DC. Ed, you are live on Truth Wanted. What's up?
Hey, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. Hey, great. Hey, thanks for letting me on. Hey, so my name's Ed. I've got a new book coming out that is, I think you guys might find interesting. You especially, Dr. Josh. It's called A History of the Goddess. And I went through the Bible and I tracked all the references to goddesses, Asherah and Astarte, and I figured out what the story was being told and sort of put it in a historical perspective and sort of the almost a theological perspective too, like who is the wife of God? So I'm curious how much you know. I mean, Dr. Josh, I know you're a real scholar, so I'm curious how much you know about Asherah and Astarte and what your take is on those characters in the Bible.
I mean, that's a pretty general question. So certainly I'm not an expert on Astarte or Asherah. So I guess for those that are listening that might not be familiar, there's an awful lot in the biblical text in the canonical form of the Bible that, talks about how there's an Asherah pole, for example, that is used as a site of worship, sort of as a symbol for the goddess. And, people like Josiah or, the kings are told, the people are told to remove all of these symbols of, these deities that are brought alongside Yahweh. But of course, we see in other places, and just Israelite religion in general, you see, Asherah being alongside Yahweh as like a consort. And so Ted Lewis is a professor up at Johns Hopkins, and he's just come out with a book last year. It's like 1,089 pages. It's sort of his magnum opus on Israelite religion, and the title is escaping me at the moment. But he goes into great depth in one of his chapters, I think, on the goddess. Also, Mark Smith has written extensively on this, and I'm sure you've read those things if you've written on this. But I have no particular expertise in saying more than I've said about it, unless there's something specific.
No, so basically, I mean, I grew up going to church and went to Catholic high school. So, I mean, I was educated on the Bible, but I'd never even heard of these characters. And I hear these archaeologists and scholars saying this is the wife of God. So I figured that seems like an interesting theological question. And so I dug into who these characters were. And so basically I went through the neighboring mythology all the way back to Sumer and tracked it all the way back through into the Ice Age, to the Venus figurines of the Ice Age, and tracked the archaeology and mythology all the way through. And what I figured out was that, there's a repeating pattern of motifs and a real pattern of traditions that we see there. It's all Earth Mother. The Earth Mother and the Heavenly Father were the original gods, and they were the parents of all the other gods. Testament effectively tells the story of their divorce. And so it's this divorce is what's going on. And so what I figured out was that the early Hebrews are pagan, and they're worshiping El, the heavenly father of the Canaanite pantheon, and they're worshiping the entire Canaanite pantheon. Baal is the son of El. He's the king of the gods. He's like Zeus. Asherah is the wife of God. She's the mother goddess. Astarte is the maiden. She's their daughter. She's the queen of heaven. She's the most popular one. She's the goddess of love and war, and she's like Ishtar of Babylon. And she's the most popular goddess. And then there's a third one, Anat, who's the blood-soaked goddess of vengeance, who's not mentioned, but she's the consort of Baal, and her favorite activity is slaughtering the enemies of Baal. And so the Hebrew writers just leave her out of it. And then what you see in this culture war is that in shutting down these temples, it tracks the same culture wars we're fighting today. That all these things that the social progressives are fighting about, feminism, environmentalism, sex and drugs, gays and transgender people were the high priests. They're all there. It's all there in the Old Testament. The Kadesha are the sacred temple priestesses, but they're just called cult prostitutes. They don't give them any respect or credit. But actually, in the ancient world, they were really important.
Does this match up with your expertise, Dr. Josh?
I mean, religion in and of itself is incredibly complex, and there are things that you can track, back through time that have correlation as you go through. So certainly there's similarities in Inanna, Ishtar figure, and then coming into the Canaanite goddess, the different goddesses that you see. And there's similarities between them. There's no question about it. And I think that's absolutely true, that the Hebrew Bible is reacting very strongly to the polytheism that was ancient Israelite religion.
Yeah.
Um,
So,
so
just to
go
give
ahead.
some
Sorry.
context, because I don't think a lot of people really know this. I was actually talking about this with somebody this week, actually, that the ancient Canaanite people, that is the people that the ancient Hebrew people would have been related to, we're pagan in the sense that they worshipped like many gods. Like there is a long history of poly god worship in these cultures and stuff. And that what you're talking about, Dr. Josh, is the Bible is a response to that culture at the time. And there's the Bible is littered with references to this. But like the way that we interpret Christianity and the way that we interpret our history has to say, well, these people always worship one God, because that really wouldn't make sense if from the very beginning there was God and he was there, and then like they just picked up these other gods that were real, because under the Christian lens there can only be one God. But that wasn't necessarily the lens of these ancient Canaanite people, that they actually saw Yahweh as one of many gods, and that was kind of like a god of their nation. Am I portraying an accurate picture here?
Yeah. I mean, so a good chapter that I think, or a common chapter that people go to, is Deuteronomy 32. So if you look at, a passage like Deuteronomy 32, you have El, you have Yahweh, you have the other deities that are set over the nations, the individual nations. And there's, always this debate about whether El and Yahweh in that passage, is that supposed to be the same God? Is it two gods? But the point here is that the Hebrew Bible in and of itself, while it's not a unified text and it doesn't have like this unified message necessarily, one of the things that we see is that it's monotheism is rather late in its development. Again, this is not my area of specialization in the field. Again, I would point everybody to Mark Smith and to Ted Lewis as good people to read on that. But it's rather late to see monotheism develop. Early on, there's the recognition very clearly that there are many deities. It's just that, when you read through, for example, the priestly creation account in Genesis 1, there are so many motifs that are brought in from Egyptian creation stories, Mesopotamian creation stories. You see things from Ugaritic, from the Canaanite, deities, and they're being used in a way not so much to say that there's only one God, but that Yahweh is that Israel's God is the supreme deity, and he's even more supreme than what these other deities were in their creation account. So it's very complex. I mean, there's no question about it. Quite an undertaking, to go through. Even just looking at female deities. Megan wrote her master's thesis on Inanna Ishtar, so she'd actually be somebody interesting to talk to about that. But it's complicated.
Complicated. Because this is interesting to me, because when I first read about this, I thought this was BS. I thought this was because like there's tons of like Bible, this is the real origins of the Bible kind of stories out there and stuff. And the more I read about this, I was like, no, wait, actually, there's like a huge amount of like academic people writing about this topic, that the origins of Judaism is polytheistic in nature, which is like a really, 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 really big deal if you are basing, your idea of what this religion is based on the traditional Christian lens, which says that it started monotheistic and then it got polytheistic, right? Because like the people kind of fell away and turned to other gods, but really it's like the opposite. It started polytheistic and then turned monotheistic over time, which I mean, to me has huge implications for the religion, but like, it was just something I had never, ever encountered until I started reading books on this and like talking to people about it. But it's not something you ever hear in a church. It's not something that ever really comes up in that. So it's really fascinating. I think it's really interesting. So Ed, I hope your book is cool. Maybe you should send one to the ACA if you get the chance, so I can get to take a look at it. But anything else you want to ask before we wrap up this particular call?
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. I'll be happy to send you guys a copy. And Dr. Josh will definitely try and get in touch with you for sure. But yeah, it's absolutely that my position is that it starts out polytheistic and that it's actually Moses that introduces monotheism and the new name Yahweh, and that Yahweh was a replacement name for El to introduce monotheism. And at that point, it launches a culture war where they have to shut down the rival temples because monotheism requires that all the other temples be closed, and that was very unpopular, and that they fight that out over the entire period of the first temple, for the entire history of the first temple.
Interesting. Something to look into for sure. Thanks again, Ed, for calling in on that. I don't know if he gave a lot of historical narrative there. A lot of it was that some of that was kind of new to me. I don't know that I would entirely agree with. I'd have to see where he'd get his sources on. For example, talking about the culture wars stuff. I know there's been a lot of revisionism and I mean historical revisionism in the academic sense, where they're trying to get a more accurate sense of history. In where LGBT peoples fit in like the historical narrative and stuff. A lot of people make the argument that, the Bible is actually talking more or making reference to these people having different sexual orientations and stuff. Obviously they didn't have the terminology that we use today and stuff. And, I've heard that kind of stuff. So the rest of that stuff, I'm not sure of, to be honest with you. I don't know. I was waiting for you to chime in because I knew that you would be the one that would be the person to say whether or not you believe in that. But,
yeah, I mean, I think, unfortunately, I think to get into some of the details of some of those things would take up more time than maybe we'd want to on a show like this. So
maybe so, and that's why you should go to. And I messed up the channel name earlier. It's Digital Hammurabi. I said Hammurabi.
It's all the same.
But that's why they pay you the big bucks, and I'm just a guy with a microphone. But let's go ahead and go to our next caller here. We're going to talk to Adam again. Adam from Illinois. Adam called in last week, questioning my Christianity, saying that I was not a true Christian. Wanted to talk a little bit more about the no true Scotsman fallacy. Adam, what's up?
Hey, thanks for having me on. You're awesome.
Yeah. How can I help you, Adam?
The no true Scotsman fallacy. I just wanted to talk about that. There's problems with the no true Scotsman fallacy. Sometimes it doesn't always work. Sometimes the fallacy is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes the fallacy is not a fallacy.
Yes, I agree with you.
You really?
Well, sure. I mean, people use fallacies wrong all the time. I think I do think this comes up when we talk about. So, if for context, we were talking about the idea of what it means to be a Christian. It was last week we had this conversation of whether I was really a Christian or not, because there is an idea purported in Christianity that if you're a true Christian, you would never leave the faith, and I left the faith, so therefore I was never a Christian. And that's an argument that you see a lot. In particularly evangelical circles, but in other kinds of circles as well. And my argument is that I think Ross, my co-host, brought up that this was a no true Scotsman, and I wouldn't actually put it that way myself. I would say that there are different definitions of Christianity, and that is just one of them. And I think under a lot of other definitions of Christianity, I would fall into being a Christian 100%. This is one definition where I could not possibly fall into, but I would also argue that that is a definition that I find to be unfounded and unreasonable. And the reason why I say that is because if you look at any other ideology, any other religion or like idea that people believe in, people change their minds on things. Like we can find evidence of that for pretty much every other idea like ever. I don't see why Christianity gets to be special in the sense that, once you truly believe, you'll never get out. I think there are people who call themselves atheists and then aren't atheists anymore. And while I might, disagree with their definition of atheist, like I wouldn't take away the fact that they maybe, use that personally it had meaning to them in some sense. And maybe they would even have the same definition of atheist as I use and would still go away. I don't think that means they were never atheists, right? But for some reason, there is this idea in Christianity that, you were never a real Christian because I don't know, the Holy Spirit filled you up in some way and it would never leave you, or you would just never really have doubts, which I just think just isn't true to human beings. Like, human beings have doubts about everything. Even the most hardened Christians, I would argue, have questioned their faith at some point in their lives. So I don't think it's fair to say that I was never a Christian because I left the faith. I think one that discounts and devalues a lot of people's experience within the church, including my own, but also that, again, every other idea, people can like not believe it anymore. Christianity is not a special exception to that rule, in my opinion. So anyway, that's my response to that, Adam. I know that was a lot. What do you think?
Well, I believe that Christianity is the exception to that rule, because you have to have a personal relationship with God in order to be a Christian. And so, kind of like I said last week, is if you actually knew God and then suddenly you don't believe he ever existed, well, how could you personally know him and then say he never exists, because you're an atheist now? And then, then you try to explain it. You try to explain away your experiences at church. You know, they weren't spiritual; they were just psychological and stuff like that. And you explain your experiences away.
Correct. Yes, because if it's true that God isn't real, at least the Christian God isn't real, then I still have those experiences. So they need explanations. So that is the explanations for those things. Like, that's just the logical conclusion of what would happen if God wasn't real. So I don't see why that's a problem.
Well, okay. I agree with everything you just said. Like, I agree that when you explain your experiences away, that you're accurate. Like, But my thing is, I don't think you ever had a relationship with God to begin with, and if God isn't real.
But here's the thing: I don't think I did either. That's the point. That's the whole point of the atheism thing, right? Like, it wouldn't make sense for me to say, yeah, I had a real relationship with God, but I'm not about that anymore. Like, that doesn't fly, you know? So like, you know, I don't know what to tell you. Like, you believe you have a relationship with God, and I don't, because I don't believe in God. It's not that I don't believe that you're telling the truth when you say you have a relationship. I think you do believe it, but I think that your explanation for your experiences doesn't match up with what I would explain as the reason for your experiences. So, you know, I think that's all there is to it. I don't know where else we can go with that.
You mentioned earlier that your church or something wanted you to like swear your allegiance to something that you didn't truly fully understand.
I was making earlier in this show, I was making the commentary that the church, you know, and again, the Christians include billions of people. Everybody's experiences are going to be different, right? But like, what is common in American evangelicalism is that the church really wants you to be a Christian from an early age before you have the ability to really understand what that means. That was true to my experience. I think that was true for Dr. Josh's experience. And that is a commitment to an ideology that you don't fully understand until you're older and realize what you're swearing your allegiance to. I think I said something along those lines. Obviously, that wasn't exactly my words, but that was the point I was making. I wasn't saying that, oh, the church literally made me swear an oath, you know, or anything like that. But like, that social and cultural pressure is still there, even outside the church, even just in American society in general, that, oh, you still want to be a Christian to be a good person, for example.
I mean, I'm going to say, like, the only reason that I think that this comes up outside of a purely, you know, academic sense of, you know, what is it that people believe in religion, is that this is very much as it was in the first century and, you know, early second century, a type of protective, you know, defense mechanism, right? So if you read what 1 John 2, I don't remember which verse it was, but, you know, they go out from us, it's because they were never of us, right? They were never of. So, but this is the sort of rationale that I think is required for this type of belief. So from an internal critique, you know, if we're stepping into that worldview, you know, I would agree that the conclusion that one would have to draw, if you hold that to be true, is that, well, if somebody leaves the faith, they never really were a true Christian. The problem with that, I think, is looking at it internally how much sense does that really make? Right. And what I mean by that is I had a conversation 8 months ago, maybe, with a fellow on Twitter who is a pastor, and he made a similar comment to me. And it used to bother me more than it does now. You were never really saved. Well, okay. Like you never really believed the gospel. Well, I gave him the gospel then. And it took about 5 tweets, right? And at the end of it, he said, "Oh, well, I guess you were saved. You're just backslidden." Right. And this is sort of where you end up, I think, in this position is if somebody is no longer actively in the faith, there has to be an explanation for it, because you can't have a situation where, that you have people just leaving that were filled with the Holy Spirit. That doesn't make any sense, right? And so what's the rationale for that? And I think that's what's happening here. So from a purely, internal critique, I think that has to fit with the teaching, that has to fit with the theology. But I would ask, maybe for us all to take a step back and say, to take it outside of this for just a second, when Peter says, I think it's in 2 Peter, but it's probably not. It's probably in 1 Peter, where he talks about scoffers that are coming and saying, all things continue on as they always were, and but be not deceived, right? God's not mocked. He's not, I know it seems like it's been all this time and he hasn't come back yet, but it's not because it's not real. It's because God is being so generous and so merciful and long suffering with us that he's giving us so much more time. And that explains it, right? It's the Harold Camping, right? If you remember Harold Camping from 2011, I think,
right.
May 21st comes and goes. Well, it's not that it didn't happen, because it did happen, but God is just giving us a little bit more time.
Sure. Sure.
Yeah. I just think that's where we are with this.
Yeah. What do you think, Adam?
What do you think?
Oh, there we go. Look at that.
Is it back to me?
Back to you, Adam.
Okay. A couple things. I'm not using 1 John. I'm using Matthew 7, where Jesus says that not everyone that calls me Lord, and not everyone that does all these works in my name, is that I know them. And Jesus doesn't say that, well, I knew you, but you didn't just hang on. He says in verse 23, Matthew 7:23, and then I will profess unto them, I never knew you. Depart from me, ye that work iniquity. He's not saying that he knew them, but then they fell away. He says he never knew them. So that's where I get my belief from, that if you do fall away, it's because he never knew you. But you also said being filled with the Holy Ghost is foolish. And could you elaborate on that?
Is whoish?
Foolish.
Foolish.
Foolish. Oh, well, I think I said that because I think we were talking about, because that's an experience people say where they're filled with the Holy Spirit. And so therefore, they know that they are saved or that they are a Christian because they have that spirit in them, I think is what that was talking about. But, here's the thing, Adam, like, I don't believe the Bible is true. Like, I don't think that theology, it might be internally consistent, but it is not externally consistent. Because I think people can be Christians and think that they're Christians and then not be Christians, because I think people can be Muslims and then think not be Muslims anymore. I think people can be Buddhists and not be Buddhists anymore. And Christianity is just one of many identities that human beings can pick up with themselves and disavow. And here's the thing, Adam, the entire time I was a Christian, or at least, ostensibly in your eyes, when I wasn't a Christian, right? But when I called myself a Christian, and when all the other people around me were there, none of them said, hey, Dan, you're not like a real Christian, right? Like, that wasn't a conversation that ever happened. It only happens because I left now. And you see how this can be a problem. Like, if you have no internal mechanism to figure out whether someone is a Christian or not, unless they leave, then and all you're left to rely on, and I believe you said this last week, is whether God can judge your heart. And that's a problem because none of us are God. So we don't know who's real and who isn't. Adam, you could be a fake Christian right now And I have no idea of knowing until you decide to leave the faith one day. And so,
and when you do, like Adam, if you do, Adam, if you do leave the faith, rest assured you will hear this, and you will have the same feeling. Like, wait a second. For 25 years, I knew that I was a sinner, and I knew that the only thing that I could do to be in contact and in a eternal state with a holy God was nothing that I could do of my own accord. It was something that Jesus had to do. That he did of his own volition, completely merciful, nothing that I did, that he died on the cross, rose 3 days later, paying for my sins and rising for my justification. And that when I trusted in him, and only in that, that I was justified, completely cleansed of my sin, and sealed with the Holy Spirit of promise, right? It wasn't by works that I was saved, it was by grace through faith, right? I believe that for 25 years. Now, if you believe that, which I suspect that you do, and then 10 years from now, you go, well, hot damn, I don't know that that's true anymore. Guess what everybody's going to say? Well, Adam, you never really believed, buddy.
Yeah. And the reason why this call doesn't offend me is because before I even got into doing this thing, I saw it happen to other atheist content creators, and I was fully ready for this. And it already has happened in my personal life. I've already had people who've brought this apologetic to me. So it is offensive because you don't know me. You saw an online video of me one time and decided to call into the show, which is fine, but you decided to discount my entirety of my Christian experience based on that. And the people who knew me in real life, they know me. And you know what? They saw the work I did, and they got to see me in ways that you never will. So I don't want to talk about this anymore with you, Adam, not because I'm not interested in this topic, but it is the second time we talk about it. I hope I've cleared up things with you, and I just kind of want to move on because it is still frustrating to keep talking about this. Like, it's gaslighting. It's gaslighting, right? It's like it is a built-in mechanism to provide doubt in people's minds as to whether or not they are sure in their doubts, that they're sure that they were even part of this thing in the first place. And it's also, as you mentioned, Dr. Josh, this is a way for people to give explanatory power as to why people left the faith, because there's no other way to explain it otherwise. If this was the true, ultimate, best thing ever, why would anybody leave? Well, maybe it's because it's not the true, ultimate, best thing ever. Maybe it's not the ultimate truth. Maybe it is one of many explanations that human beings have come up with to explain the world that just doesn't turn out to be real. And that's my take. That's what I think Christianity is. I think it's one of many man-made explanations. But anyway, we're getting towards the end of the show here. I have two other callers, and I can't get to both of you guys. We just don't have the time. Gosh, I really want to talk to both of you guys. I'm going to talk to Michael from Ohio. Sorry, Phil from Texas. Try to call in next time. Maybe get us in the after show Discord, which we'll be going in a second. But we got like 5 minutes for this call. So let's hear it. We're talking to Michael in Ohio. Michael, what's going on?
Hi. I would like to talk about Christianity and specifically, instead of Jesus, more about Satan. And
cool.
I'm an atheist myself, but I look at how Christianity and specifically this belief in Satan has had an effect on our society and how it lays the bedrock for a lot of these conspiracy theories. Because, Satan's, according to the myth, is out there doing these nefarious acts and up to all kinds of mischief and trying to lead people astray and all this. And it just seems like things like QAnon and a lot of these other conspiracies kind of fit that mold. And like, how do we as a society manage this stuff, to address it,
Michael, I've been trying to figure out the answer to this question for a long freaking time. Okay. And let me tell you, I don't have a lot of good answers for you. I have some guesses, and I think we really need to consider restructuring the way that we give each other information in our society. And I'm talking about the way that we do social media, the way that our algorithms work, right? Everybody talks about the algorithms these days, but what I mean by it is people talk about this free speech thing, like, oh, everybody should be able to post whatever they want. And like, to some degree, I agree with it, but there's also real world harm that comes to this. Here's the thing. We never had free speech on Facebook. We never had free speech on Twitter. We never had free speech on YouTube. There was always terms of services for all of these platforms. And on top of this, these algorithms that are recommended to us we're already there. That, like, it already affects the way that we see your information. So like the whole free speech thing is screwed from the very beginning, in my opinion. So when people talk about these free speech arguments, how it's violating it, it doesn't matter. These are private companies making their own decisions as to what goes on their platforms or not. Until it becomes a public utility, then we can talk about how to regulate that. But until then, we can't really do much outside of what's already like federally legislated. But let's go even further, right? Like, what do we do? Let's say we have control over Facebook and Twitter and all these places. What do we do with that? Well, what have we tried before? I mean, we've tried having terms and conditions on certain stuff that can't be uploaded. You can't upload nudity on YouTube, right? That's one example. They've tried keyword stuff. So there's a potential that, I mean, somehow Truth Wanted's been okay. But other shows and other content creators I know have been hit all the time with violations of automatic filters they put in that affects their revenue because they make money off of this stuff. So that seems like it can be iffy. I don't know. I don't know what the best thing is. I try to do this show. I try to talk to people about it in my own personal life, and I try to do the best I can as an individual. But I'm not a software engineer. I'm not someone who studies this stuff professionally. I'm just a guy on the internet that like has opinions on things sometimes, and people like to hear it for one reason or another. But the best thing you can do as an individual, I think, is to talk to people around you and have directly those conversations yourself, because you can be a great influence in somebody's life that a post on social media might not ever be, because you're there and you get to talk to that person and you know their strengths, their weaknesses, their personal history with stuff. And you can almost work better than any algorithm could in that sense, although that might not be true forever. AI is getting pretty good these days. But point is, I think that's what we have to do. I think maybe it's not everybody can't start call-in shows, but you can talk to the people in your life, and you can try to have these conversations one day at a time with folks, and people's minds do change. I'm an example of that. Dr. Josh is an example of that. And tons of other people have called into the show are examples of that. So don't give up hope. There is hope. I have to tell myself this too, but there is hope. Like, people do change, and it just starts with just one conversation at a time. But anyway, that's my take. Dr. Josh, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think that teaching people to think critically and encouraging them to critically examine what it is that they believe, and doing it on that local level, in my experience, which again, take with a grain of salt, but is very effective, because there are probably 10 or 15 people that I interact with, on a weekly basis, and having these types of sort of sporadic conversations where, I've had those conversations very unexpectedly with, a family member that said something akin to, well, yeah, I mean, maybe the earth is flat. It's like, okay, well, let's think about that for a second. I didn't expect that somebody that I know so well would say something like that. But, then engaging at that level and saying, all right, I guess I see why you say that, but what if we think about it this way? But I do think that on an individual level, that's where you're most effective, because you don't have the group think that you're trying to pull them from. So,
yeah, Michael, if you were Mark Zuckerberg, I'd have some strong words to say to you, but you're not. You're Michael from Ohio, and this is the best we can do. Yeah. Okay? Sound good?
Right.
All right, cool. That's all the time we got right now, Michael. We got to wrap up this show, but thanks for calling in. I hope that was good for you, as it was for me. Hey, anyway, this is Truth Wanted, folks. We're going to go to the after show Discord, so don't go away just yet, please. come join me and Dr. Josh there for some fun conversations. Link to that is going to be in the description. I want to give a special thanks to Dr. Josh for being on the show. Dr. Josh, thank you.
Thank you.
Where can people find you at?
Yeah, Digital Hammurabi, HAMMURABI.com, or our YouTube channel, Digital Hammurabi. My wife has worked very hard to get everything really user friendly. So yeah, go check us out.
Heck yeah, definitely go check it out. And if you like this show, there's a couple different ways you can support it. You can, of course, subscribe on YouTube. It's also available on iTunes, Spotify, wherever else you get your podcasts. Please leave nice reviews. It makes me happy. You can also email. Oh, well, let's go over the other ways to support the show. One is being a member of the show. In case you know how to do that, you can go on YouTube and become a member. You can hit that button to join. You get little emoticons for the chat and stuff. It's pretty fun. It's just another way to help the show out. Another way to do it is through our merch. I'm wearing the hoodie right now. Check it out. That Truth Wanted hoodie. You should definitely check it out as well. We got a bit.ly link for that in the description, where you can get hoodies, shirts, and stickers and all kinds of other stuff. And of course, folks, please, patreon.com. We need more patrons of the show. We're going to run out. Patreon.com is a great way to do it, /Truth Wanted. And again, all that money goes towards making this show even better. So thank you guys who already donate on there. If you want to get in touch with me, a couple ways to do it. truth@atheist-community.org is the email. And you can follow me on Twitter @ObjectivelyDan and @Truth Wanted. There's also a Twitter for that as well. And hey, if you're also on social media, the Facebook fan group is another way to hang out with other fans of the group. It's pretty cool. I recommend you join, as well as the Discord, to continue those conversations. Last but never not least, I have to thank the wonderful, spectacular, amazing, awesome, cool crew that helps make this show happen every single week. Look at that. Look at that awesome crew. Puck is doing something. He's taking care of his skin, man. He's just having a good time. Somebody make sure you wake him up so he moisturizes over there. Yeah, we got shirts and cats and all kinds of things. So thank you guys. Thank you, crew, for making this show happen every single week. You guys are awesome. Dr. Josh, is there any last words of wisdom, advice, encouragement that you want to give before we wrap up this show?
Oh, no, I just appreciate you having me on. It's been a lot of fun and hope to do it again.
Heck yeah. All right. Remember, folks, to always keep wanting the truth, and I'll see you next time.